Have you ever looked down at your own feet and quietly startled yourself because you couldn't quite remember the last time they truly felt strong? Has there been a moment when you rose from bed only to pause for a few seconds, waiting for your legs to remember how to walk again? Those same legs once carried your grandchildren with ease, once knelt on kitchen floors, once walked to the market through countless seasons of sun and rain. But now, do they remain as silent as they once were? In today's video, I'd like to gently invite you on a special journey, a journey back to your very own feet. There'll be no lectures, no fear, only soft, honest reflections about 5 simple foods that might just be the quiet thread helping you hold on to strength, independence, and dignity with every step you take. And before we begin, if any part of this feels worth pondering to you, I warmly invite you to leave a comment below or subscribe to join us on this path of gentle self-care. Not to live longer, but to live more fully. Some mornings we don't get out of bed right away, not out of laziness, but because our legs seem to need a few extra breaths just to wake up. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever sat quietly in the early light, looking down at your feet, and wondered, how far have they carried me already? Those same feet once cradled your child, soothed your grandchild, once stood for hours by the stove, cooking sweet soup for Tet, sweat soaking your shirt, and yet you still smiled. They once walked without pause through all the working years, never asking to stop, never waiting for thanks. They've endured so much, but they've never once complained. Evelyn, a 71-year-old woman from a small town near an oak forest, once shared that she looked down at her worn sandals by the door and suddenly began to cry. Not out of sadness, but because she missed the time when they used to be threadbare from all the places they'd taken her. They still sit there now, barely used, because I don't go very far anymore, she said, turning her face away as she spoke. It's true, isn't it? Our feet have been with us since the very beginning. They never ask, but they understand. They never speak, but they remember. They know the moments we stumbled. They remember the quiet walks after an argument and the first time we held someone's hand beneath a canopy of silent trees. They haven't just carried us through the world. They've carried our memories. And the hardest part is how quietly we begin to forget them. Evelyn told me she used to sweep and tidy the house every morning, but now even walking from the bedroom to the porch means leaning on the wall. I thought maybe it's just age. She laughed softly, then paused. But maybe it's something I've forgotten right here in my own body. Most of us don't notice when our legs begin to tire. No one tells us when the strength starts to fade. There's just a day when you realize you can't quite walk as fast as you used to, and it stops you right in your tracks. Not because you've lost the ability to walk, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped honoring the very part of you that once stood the strongest. So today, we'll walk together, without rushing, gently, and we'll begin with the simplest thing of all, listening to our feet. Can you still remember the last time you walked completely free? Evelyn used to be someone who always took the lead. She tended the garden on her own, swept the yard, and cooked sour soup for the whole family, never once complaining of being tired. But then came an afternoon. She was folding an old tablecloth when she suddenly froze, unable to remember what she had meant to do next. It wasn't a major lapse, just a vague feeling, like a thin veil of smoke passing through her mind. And from that day on, she began to notice. Each time she walked from the house to the front gate, she had to stop midway. Not because of the view, but because her legs no longer cooperated the way they used to. Some mornings, she woke with a dull tingling from her knees down to her ankles. Some nights, a sudden cramp would grip her calves, and it would take a long time rubbing them just to ease the ache. Still, she told herself, it's probably just age. No one really warns us about the day our legs stop obeying. There's no alarm bell, no flashing sign, just quiet, subtle changes, but very real ones. Her neighbor, Walter, who still walks by the lake every morning, once stopped by to drop off some pears from his garden. Seeing her sitting out on the porch, he smiled and said, "Been a while since I saw you on your walks. The cherry trees are in full bloom down by the path. She smiled back, but didn't answer, because deep down she knew she couldn't walk that far anymore. Not because she was lazy, not because she didn't want to, but because something inside her had quietly shifted. She wasn't sure if it was poor circulation, or a nutritional deficiency, or maybe just her body whispering a truth she hadn't wanted to hear. Eventually, her family began to notice too. Her daughter gently suggested a doctor's visit, but Evelyn shook her head. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I probably just need a little rest." But behind those reassuring words was the faintest, almost imperceptible sigh. There's something we rarely say aloud, but almost everyone feels it. Aging doesn't arrive with a number. It arrives when we start hesitating to stand, not from laziness, but from no longer being sure of each step. And just like that, over time, we grow accustomed to staying seated instead of stepping out, to asking others to fetch things for us, to letting the hours pass from the comfort of a chair, blanket draped across our legs. No one blames us, but sometimes we blame ourselves for not noticing sooner. If any part of this feels like your own story, please don't hesitate to leave a line in the comments below. Someone else might read it and realize they're not alone. We'll keep going, not to say it's too late, but to say it's still possible. Ever since Evelyn began to feel that her legs were not quite the same, she started paying closer attention. But she didn't want to talk about it. Every morning, she still folded her blanket, washed her face, and turned on the radio at exactly 6 a.m. She still made her own tea, carefully picked the softest pair of shoes, and walked a few slow circles around the porch, like an old, familiar ritual. She still smiled at neighbors by the gate, still told her children and grandchildren, "I'm just fine. It's a bit chilly today. That's why I'm not going out." The truth was, she simply didn't want anyone to see the way she had to stop mid-path to gently rub her ankle, or how she quietly leaned on the edge of the table each time she rose from her rattan chair. One quiet afternoon, she decided to go upstairs to find an old notebook. Just 9 steps. But by the 5th, her heart was racing faster than her feet. A strange feeling, as if a part of her was no longer in sync with the rest. She stopped, turned back in silence. No one saw, no one asked, and she didn't tell. Not because she was afraid, but because she wasn't yet ready to name what was happening. Mr. Walter, the old friend who lived nearby, once said, "The strangest thing is knowing something's wrong and still pretending everything's fine." He said that as he eased himself onto a park bench, one hand resting gently on his left knee, eyes gazing out over the soft gray lake. We all go through a phase like that sooner or later, a phase where we know, but we try to forget. We feel the tiredness, but still walk briskly so no one notices. We feel our hands trembling, but still force open the stubborn jam jar on the kitchen shelf. Because even in old age, we have pride. We don't want to worry our children. We don't want to be seen as a burden. We don't want anyone rearranging our lives, even with good intentions. So we carry on. We push ourselves. We whisper, "I can still do this," even as our legs begin to quietly complain in ways only we can hear. Resistance isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's just holding on to the image of who we were, even as something inside starts to quietly crack. But just like Evelyn, just like Walter, there comes a day when we must face it, not because our body stops us, but because our heart begins to fear, not fear illness, but fear losing ourselves. That day, Evelyn had only meant to sit for a while on the old wooden bench out on the porch. The sky wasn't sunny, nor was it gray with rain. Just a soft, quiet afternoon, the breeze weaving gently through the red maple leaves at the end of the lane, like it had for years. Her daughter Emily came home early from work, with little Liam in tow, her young grandson, his tiny feet skipping into the yard, a lollipop in hand, eyes glowing like always. "Grandma, will you come to the park with me again tomorrow?" he chirped, looking up, unaware that such a simple question could cause her heart to sink, just slightly. She didn't answer right away. She smiled faintly, reached out, and brushed his hair aside. The boy thought she'd said yes, and dashed inside, grinning ear to ear. And there she remained, Evelyn, her gaze quiet, drifting toward the neatly placed sandals beneath her bench. Those sandals hadn't left the porch in over a week. She already knew she couldn't walk as far as she once did, but it wasn't until that innocent question, from a child who simply wanted one more walk, that she truly felt what she'd been losing. It wasn't health, it wasn't youth, it was something quieter, the fading of connection, a walk, the sound of birds in the trees, the feel of a tiny hand slipping into hers. Our feet aren't just made for walking, they're bridges to our grandchildren, to the life still waiting just outside the door. They hold the imprint of memory, and now they're quietly asking to be cared for. She remembered the old days, back when her husband was still alive, and every evening, the two of them would take a stroll around Maple Lake, just a few minutes from home. He always carried a small flashlight. She brought a little basket of cookies. One evening, when the drizzle came early, she told him perhaps they should stay in, but he only smiled and said, "If your legs don't get to walk, they'll start to feel lonely." Now he was gone, and her legs were beginning to feel lonely too. Liam's question, short, light, had opened a door she'd been avoiding for days. It wasn't about soreness anymore, or stiff knees. It was the feeling of slowly drifting away from the things that once made her feel alive. That was the moment she could no longer deny it. If you too have ever had a moment like this, awakened by a grandchild's gaze, a passing question, or simply the sight of sandals resting quietly by the door, we invite you to share it with us, because perhaps your story might help someone else realize what they too have been quietly walking past. That night, Evelyn didn't fall asleep early like she usually did. She sat for a long time in the wooden chair by the window, a small, time-worn notebook resting gently in her hands. She didn't write anything. She simply sat and listened. The ticking of the clock, the whisper of wind brushing past, and a sound quieter still, coming from somewhere deep within her legs. It wasn't pain. It was a question, a quiet invitation. Do you still want to keep walking? And in that moment, she knew she wouldn't remain still any longer. The next morning, she made her usual cup of warm water, but this time, she added a few slices of fresh beetroot Emily had brought home the day before. "You should try this, Mom. It's good for circulation," her daughter had said. Evelyn used to just nod and smile politely, but today she poured herself a small glass and drank it slowly. At lunchtime, she opened the fridge to grab some vegetables for soup, but her hand paused on a bag of fresh spinach. For some reason, for the first time in weeks, she wanted to cook something new with her own hands. That evening, instead of braised pork, she ate a light piece of steamed salmon, sprinkled crushed walnuts over brown rice, and in her small fruit bowl, no cookies, just ripe avocado slices and half a banana. No one had asked her to do any of this. No doctor had insisted. It was simply her legs speaking in the softest of ways. "I need your attention." And so she began to pay attention. No strict workouts, no rigid schedules, just a few quiet changes. A glass of coconut water before bedtime, a handful of almonds after lunch, a bit of sautéed kale, which her grandson cheerfully called leaves of strength. Each meal wasn't a cure. It was her way of saying thank you to the feet that had carried her nearly all her life. When she shared this with Mr. Walter, he simply smiled and said gently, "Our bodies, they don't ask for much. They just need to know we still care. Growing old is not the end. It's a chance to slow down and begin again with deeper tenderness." Evelyn still doesn't walk far, but each morning she now takes a few steady steps around the porch without needing to hold on. And when her grandson asked again, "Grandma, can we go to the park this weekend?" she smiled, placed her hand gently on her knee, and nodded. If you've ever started again with a new dish, a gentle habit, or one quiet act of self-kindness, please feel free to share your story below, because sometimes you are the very inspiration someone else is quietly waiting for before they take that next small, powerful step. These days, Evelyn still sits in that old wooden chair on the porch each morning. Once it was just a resting spot, but now it's where she warms up her legs, gently, a few simple movements, steady like a quiet ritual. She no longer walks as fast as she used to, but her steps have changed. No more secretly holding onto walls. No more fear of sudden cramps mid-stride. Just that, and she feels like she's returned to herself. Every Saturday morning, she walks with little Liam around the neighborhood park. Not far, not rushed. They count the fallen maple leaves together, inhale the smell of baked goods from the street cart by the gate. Last week, she queued up at the farmer's market for vegetables. The vendor looked up, surprised. "Miss Evelyn, you're back at the market? That's wonderful." She simply smiled and nodded. No explanation needed, because sometimes returning doesn't need words. Just being there is answer enough. In the afternoon, she still waters her little lavender pots in the yard. The sparrows have returned to perch along the garden wall. The sound of water trickling, wind moving through the leaves, and feet brushing across the dry earth. All of it plays like an old song, heard again after many years. Evelyn never says she's recovered. She simply says, "I feel more alive than I did before." One day her daughter asked, "Mom, would you like us to take you in for a full checkup?" Evelyn shook her head, smiling. "Honestly, I don't need anyone to fix me. I just need someone to listen and give me a little time." Healing never arrives like a miracle. It comes quietly, through small, loving choices we make for ourselves day by day. A glass of coconut water, a soft banana, a slice of ginger steamed salmon, a slow walk under the pale morning sun. Each little thing, seemingly ordinary, becomes a way to rekindle not just her legs, but her life. She didn't return as the Evelyn she once was. She returned as someone new, unhurried, unresisting, but more certain of what truly matters. Her steps aren't wide, but they are steady, not fast, but full of presence. And if you too have ever returned to something familiar, but with a new heart, please share it with us. Because quiet rebirths like yours may be the very light someone else is silently waiting for. These days in the late afternoons, Evelyn often arrives at the park a little earlier than before. Not to exercise, but because she enjoys watching the sun set slowly. She likes hearing other people's footsteps, and she cherishes the feeling that her legs no longer tremble the way they used to. She doesn't tell anyone about the time she almost gave up. Doesn't speak of that cold night when she sat alone, notebook in hand, her soul's chilled and silent. Doesn't mention the mornings when 10 steps were all she could take before having to sit down. She doesn't speak of it because there's no need to. People can see it in the way she now stands tall at the vegetable stall, in how she bends to pick up a fallen orange and smiles instead of sighing, in the way she walks hand in hand with her grandson without needing someone to hold her back. One morning she passed by Mr. Walter's house. He was sitting on the front steps, eyes quietly distant. Seeing her, he simply said, "You're walking steady these days." She didn't answer, just sat down beside him, reached into her bag, and pulled out 2 soft dates. She handed him one, and together they sat in silence. No one talked about health. No one asked for the secret. Just 2 elders sharing a quiet, ordinary morning. And in that silence, something was exchanged. From that day on, Mr. Walter began to shift too. Not dramatically, just a little spinach boiled at lunch, a light glass of lemon water in the afternoon, no sugar. One day his grandson asked, "Why are you eating all this weird stuff now, Grandpa?" He smiled, tousled the boy's hair and said, "Because I want to keep walking with you for a little longer." Evelyn never thought of herself as inspiring. She never tried to be a role model. She just lived, simply, slowly, present, in a way that helped others feel safe. And over time, those around her began to live a little differently too. No one called it anything, but they started drinking an extra glass of water, eating more greens, taking 5 quiet minutes each morning to stretch their legs instead of rushing out of bed. They began sending each other notes about foods that support circulation. And slowly, they started to believe that caring for your feet is also a way to care for your life. If someone has ever inspired you, not with grand gestures, but simply by being there, we'd love to hear your story. Sometimes a glance, a quiet walk, a humble meal, is all it takes to remind us that it's never too late to begin again from a place we once thought was closed. A life message, a message for you, for those who have walked so far and are now learning how to gently return to yourselves. Perhaps your steps are no longer as quick as they once were, but please don't forget, these feet once carried an entire life, and they are still here, waiting to be cared for with the simplest of things. A glass of beetroot juice, a morning banana, a few slow steps around the garden as the sun begins to fall. Growing older is not the final chapter, it's the homecoming, where we no longer need to prove anything. We simply need to be here, not to do more, but to live more deeply. In every breath, every time we rise from a chair, every tiny hand we hold. If today you can only take a few steps, please don't feel discouraged, because sometimes just walking toward the light is more than enough. We've always believed this. Even if life slows down, you are still the warm light in the home, steady, quiet, and full of love.